There was a time, perhaps quiet, perhaps fleeting, when you felt deeply connected. To life, to yourself, to something more, not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were being. You didn't call it a vibration back then, but you lived it, and then life happened. You learned the rules, you followed the steps, you did what was right, and still a quiet emptiness echoed back. Have you felt it? That strange silence beneath all your effort, as if something essential was missing, even though you tried so hard to get it right. Maybe it's not that you lost the way. Maybe you've just been tuned to the wrong frequency. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering what already lives in you, because the code isn't hidden. It's humming beneath the noise, waiting for you to return. So take a breath, not to begin again, but to come back. You're not broken, you're remembering. Are you ready to feel what's always been yours? Have you ever had the feeling that no matter how much effort you put in, how many books you read, how many affirmations you repeat, how disciplined you stay, something still isn't clicking? As if you're spinning your wheels on a path that should have taken you somewhere by now, but hasn't. You try to stay positive. You meditate. You visualize. You've done the inner work, or at least you thought you had. And yet, there's this invisible wall between you and the life you know you're meant to live. A wall that no mindset hack or productivity habit seems able to dismantle. What if that wall isn't a punishment, but a mirror? Not of what you want, not even of what you believe, but of what you unconsciously vibrate every single day. You see, the universe isn't listening to your words, it's listening to your coherence. There is an energetic field that surrounds you, one that ancient mystics and modern physicists alike whisper about. Some call it the aura, others call it resonance. But at its essence, it's your vibrational fingerprint, a dynamic map broadcasting your state of being, your emotions, intentions, fears, and desires, all wrapped into a silent frequency that speaks louder than anything you say out loud. Imagine you're constantly sending out a signal. This signal doesn't care about your vision board or how passionately you speak about your goals. It's not swayed by how often you journal about your dream life. What it responds to is much simpler and much more honest. Your vibrational truth. That's why two people can take the same actions but get entirely different outcomes. It's not about what you do, it's about the energy you bring to it. You can attend the seminar, repeat the mantra, buy the crystal. But if underneath it all, you're vibrating fear, unworthiness, or doubt, that's what the field picks up on. That's what gets mirrored back. This field is like a mirror that doesn't lie. It doesn't judge. It doesn't punish. It just reflects. So the real inquiry isn't, am I doing it right? It's, what is my energy saying when I'm not paying attention? And here's the thing, that signal isn't just coming from your conscious mind. In fact, most of it is. It's coming from the nervous system reactions you haven't yet noticed. The emotional wounds you've tucked beneath your daily routines. The inner stories that have become so familiar you no longer hear them as stories. Your field is speaking when your body tenses at the thought of love, when you shrink from praise, afraid of standing out, when you overgive, secretly hoping someone will finally choose you. It speaks in your silences, in your withdrawals, in your people-pleasing. And until you become aware of that language, your reality will echo it back faithfully. The question now becomes, can you hear it? Can you slow down enough to sit with what's been speaking through you all along? To know your field is not about adding new techniques. It's about subtracting noise, turning inward not to analyze, but to listen, to feel what's alive beneath the surface, not to fix it, just to see it, to be with it. Because coherence doesn't come from controlling your mind. It comes from aligning your being. When your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors hum the same note, your life starts to sing a different song. This isn't magic. It's resonance. It's physics. It's you becoming whole again, not by becoming someone new, but by finally tuning into what's been there all along. And when that shift happens, things begin to unfold. Not because you forced them to, but because you're no longer resisting your own frequency. You're no longer trying to manifest from lack. You're no longer begging the universe to hear you because now it feels you. So maybe the next step isn't one more technique. Maybe it's a question whispered into stillness. What is my energy saying, and am I finally ready to listen? You've read the books. You've listened to the podcasts, taken the courses, gone to the retreats. You've made vision boards, rewritten limiting beliefs, meditated through the chaos. You've done the work, at least that's what you believed. And yet, there's this quiet, relentless sense of being stuck. As if no matter how much you try to shift, you keep circling back to the same place. The same patterns, the same emotional weight, the same outcomes. It's not that you aren't aware. You are. In fact, you're probably more self-aware than most people you know. And that's what makes this so frustrating. Because how can someone be so conscious, so committed to growth, and still feel like nothing's truly moving? Here's the truth no one tells you. Self-awareness doesn't always mean self-transformation. You can know the pattern and still repeat it. You can name the wound and still live from it. Because beneath all the techniques and insights, there's something deeper at play. Your energetic default. The old frequency that never really got rewritten, only layered over with better language and more refined tools. This is the invisible resistance. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It sounds like, I know this already. I've dealt with that. I'm beyond this. But the truth is, you're not stuck because you didn't learn enough. You're stuck because the part of you that was meant to transform is still vibrating the old story. You've updated the mind, but not the field. You've upgraded your ideas, but not your frequency. It's like painting a wall while the foundation underneath is still cracked. Eventually, it peels. Not because the paint was wrong, but because what's underneath hasn't changed. This is what no affirmation can override, what no new technique can bypass. It's the layer that lives before thought in your nervous system, your emotions, your energetic posture. And the field, this invisible matrix that shapes your reality, is always responding to that. You might believe you're operating from love, but if your energy still carries the imprint of fear, your life will reflect fear. You might think you're moving from purpose, but if your field is coated with proving and performing, then purpose becomes performance. So the work now is not about doing more. It's about seeing more clearly. Not chasing a better version of yourself, but recognizing the frequency script that's still writing your story in the background. There's a term for this: vibrational blind spots. These are the spaces where your awareness hasn't yet touched, where you act, speak, or decide from a place that feels evolved, but is actually just a clever disguise for the old frequency. They show up in how you love, how you ask for help, how you cope when things get uncertain. They whisper in the spaces between your achievements and your peace. They hum in the silence after a spiritual high. This is where true transformation begins, not by collecting more answers, but by recognizing the residue of old energy pretending to be growth. And here's the paradox. Your resistance isn't trying to sabotage you. It's trying to protect you. It's built on familiarity, on survival, on what once kept you safe. But safety isn't the same as expansion. Familiar isn't the same as aligned. So what if, instead of pushing harder, you paused? What if the next step isn't to learn another lesson, but to sit with the energy that's never been heard? To feel the fear beneath the drive, the grief beneath the self-improvement, the exhaustion beneath the performance. And in that stillness, to ask a different kind of question. Not what's wrong with me, but what part of me is still vibrating the past. Not how do I fix this, but what frequency am I trying to fix it from? Because when the field is broadcasting guilt, even healing becomes punishment. When the field is broadcasting control, even spiritual practices become control strategies. That's the invisible resistance. Not something outside of you, but a frequency within you that's still writing the old script, no matter how many new chapters you try to start. So the invitation is not to try harder. It's to go deeper. To shift not your methods, but your foundation. To stop asking, what else do I need to learn? And start asking, what do I need to finally release? Because maybe the truth is, you've already done enough, and what's needed now isn't effort. It's coherence, not more knowledge, but a new vibration. There's a widely held belief that's led many of us astray, well-intentioned, popular, endlessly repeated, and yet dangerously misleading. It's the idea that to attract what you want, you simply have to think about it, visualize it, obsess over it, speak it into existence. The law of attraction, right? Like attracts like. Ask and you shall receive. But what if that's only part of the truth? What if the universe isn't listening to what you say you want, but to the energy underneath it? What if it's not responding to your words or even your intentions, but to the frequency you emit when you're not trying to control it? This changes everything. You can sit in meditation every day and say, I am abundant. But if your inner world is still tangled, in fear of not having enough, your field is vibrating scarcity. And the universe? It doesn't speak English. It speaks energy. It doesn't analyze your affirmations. It reflects your state. This is the real law of attraction. It's not about the words you repeat, it's about the vibration you live. That's why so many people feel disillusioned by manifestation practices. They do the work. They get clear on what they want. But instead of drawing those desires closer, they feel like they're chasing a moving target. Because wanting something badly often means you're vibrating lack deeply. And the universe doesn't decode that as passion, it mirrors it as absence. You say, I want love. But what you're really vibrating is, I'm alone. You say, I want financial freedom, but what your body radiates is, I'm unsafe. And the field picks that up not to punish you, but to show you the frequency you've been unknowingly tuned into. The law of attraction is less about conscious intention and more about unconscious coherence. So how do you change that? How do you shift from broadcasting lack to radiating alignment? It starts by recognizing the energy behind the asking. Most people pray from anxiety. They visualize from urgency. They affirm from a place of emptiness, hoping the repetition will drown out the doubt. But intention rooted in fear only amplifies the fear. Desire coated in desperation only multiplies the distance. If you want something to change, you must become the version of you who already holds it. Not in theory, not as a performance, but in the quiet way you breathe when you no longer need to prove anything. This is the switch from trying to get to allowing yourself to be, from wishing to remembering, from begging to aligning. Instead of praying, please bring me love, you sit in the vibration of already being love. You remember what it feels like to be full, to be worthy, to be at peace, and you let that become your signal. And that signal, it's magnetic, not because you forced it to be, but because you stopped resisting what was always available to you. Here's the thing: the universe doesn't respond to what you want. It reflects who you are being. It doesn't react to your thoughts. It mirrors your coherence. So the real work isn't about asking harder, thinking better, or doing more. It's about becoming a match for what you've been trying to attract, not just on the surface, but in your bones, in the way you walk through the world, in the stillness between your words. Because when you are being what you seek, you no longer need to chase it. You become the field that calls it in. This doesn't mean you ignore your desires. Desires are sacred. They're clues from your soul. But the path to fulfillment is not paved with effort, it's paved with embodiment. Ask yourself, when I pray, do I feel anxious or calm? When I visualize, do I feel abundant or afraid? When I set goals, do they feel expansive or exhausting? These are your signals. They tell you what frequency you're vibrating beneath the surface. And if you want your outer world to change, you must start by adjusting your inner broadcast. Because the universe isn't judging you. It's not withholding. It's not a test. It's just listening closely, faithfully to the truth of your energy. And when that energy shifts, everything else follows. There comes a moment in every deep transformation when the ground beneath you no longer feels familiar. Not because you've done something wrong, but because something inside you has quietly outgrown the life you once called home. You wake up one day and realize the conversations you used to enjoy now feel hollow. The people who once felt like family no longer feel like mirrors. Even the dreams you once chased with fire seem to dissolve in your hands like mist. It can feel like loss. It is a loss, but not in the way your mind interprets it. This is the breakdown before the shift. The moment when everything you've used to define yourself begins to unravel, not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because when you begin vibrating at a new frequency, anything built on the old one starts to fall away. Relationships dissolve, habits collapse, opportunities close their doors. Not because you've failed, but because the field is realigning to match who you are now becoming. And yet, in the middle of it, it's hard not to feel like something is wrong. You feel untethered. You question everything. You wonder if maybe you took a wrong turn on this so-called spiritual path. But this is sacred ground. It's the void between versions of you. It's the quiet death of an identity that can no longer hold your truth. No one tells you that growth often feels like grief. That healing isn't always a burst of light, but sometimes a slow unraveling in the dark. You might find yourself mourning people who are still alive, missing places you no longer resonate with, crying over stories that no longer fit but that you held on to because they once made you feel safe. And then there's the paradox. The deeper you go, the more you feel both sadness and relief, both fear and freedom, because some part of you knows what's leaving isn't meant to stay, but another part still aches for the comfort of the known. That's okay. This is not about being fearless. It's about being faithful, especially when everything inside you is asking, what now? Because this is the moment your field is purifying. This is energetic detox, not punishment, not failure, not regression. It's your frequency shedding what no longer resonates. It might look like losing friends, but it's really creating space for resonance. It might feel like being lost, but it's really an invitation to navigate with presence instead of control. When you no longer fit into the old script, it can feel like you've lost your voice. But what's actually happening is that you're becoming the author. And authors know, sometimes you have to delete whole chapters not because they were bad, but because they no longer carry the story forward. So if it feels like your life is breaking down, pause. Breathe. Notice not what's falling, but what's beginning to rise in its place. You're not falling apart. You're resynchronizing. The grief is real. So is the liberation. Let both exist. Let yourself feel the ache of goodbye and the quiet joy of arrival. Because transformation doesn't always start with a vision board. Sometimes it begins with an empty room, with silence where there used to be noise, with solitude where there used to be validation. And it's in that sacred silence that your new frequency starts to speak. You may not recognize your life right now. That's a sign you're in the right place. Because to build something true, you have to clear what's false. So when things fall apart, trust the unraveling. Trust the timing. Trust your resonance. You are not being punished. You are being recalibrated. And on the other side of this shedding is a self that feels like home. There's a voice in you, soft, convincing, intelligent, that rarely screams but always seems to make sense. It doesn't sabotage your growth outright. It doesn't yell, "Don't evolve." Instead, it whispers, "Not yet. Let's wait a little longer. Are you sure this is the right path?" This is the ego's final defense, not a tantrum, not resistance through chaos, but resistance through reason. And that's why it's so easy to miss, because it sounds like wisdom. It sounds like caution. It sounds like self-care. But beneath its polished tone lies one mission: protect the familiar. The ego isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that learned how to survive. It memorized the patterns that kept you safe, even if those patterns no longer serve who you're becoming. So when you step toward change, even if it's aligned, even if it's gentle, the ego isn't thrilled. Not because it's evil, but because it equates the unknown with danger. So it begins its subtle work. You tell yourself you'll start the new routine when things calm down. You'll have that honest conversation when the timing is better. You'll trust the call to shift after just one more sign. And on the surface, these all seem like good decisions. But underneath, they're echoes of fear dressed as logic. This is the moment when change becomes a choice not just of action, but of awareness. Because the ego is not trying to destroy you. It's trying to preserve a version of you it knows how to manage. It doesn't hate the new you, it just doesn't trust it yet. And here's the nuance. You don't need to kill the ego to grow. You don't need to banish it or declare war. You only need to see it clearly, compassionately, without being fooled. When the voice inside you says, "Wait until you're more ready," ask, who's speaking? Is it fear disguised as preparation? Is it memory pretending to be wisdom? There's a sacred kind of discernment that emerges when you learn to listen without obeying. To say, "I hear you," without handing over the wheel. Because freedom isn't the absence of the ego, it's the ability to choose something deeper than its conditioning. You might feel a tug-of-war between who you were and who you're becoming. That's normal. That's sacred. There's a real grieving process that happens when you leave behind familiar identities, even if they were limiting. The part of you that procrastinates isn't lazy, it's scared. The part that clings to perfectionism isn't arrogant, it's trying to earn safety. And when you can see those patterns not as flaws, but as outdated forms of protection, something shifts. You stop fighting them. You start holding them. And in that holding, they begin to soften. Growth doesn't happen by crushing the ego. It happens by outgrowing the need for its constant defense, by becoming a frequency that no longer vibrates in reaction to fear. This isn't about pushing harder. It's about standing still and watching what arises when you stop running. Can you sit in that uncomfortable silence where old beliefs start to crack, and new truths begin to hum beneath the surface. That space, that pause, is where transformation matures. It's tempting to keep learning, to keep searching, to keep fixing. But at some point, the question becomes, can I just be the new frequency before the old me agrees with it? The ego wants confirmation. The soul seeks coherence. And coherence often begins as a quiet rebellion, an inner nod to something that feels true before it feels safe. So no, you don't need to convince your ego. You don't need to wait for it to catch up. You just need to let it sit beside you on the journey without letting it navigate. Tell it, I know you're scared. That's okay. Tell it, you've protected me for so long. Thank you. Then take one step anyway. That's how shift happens, not through battle, but through compassion in motion. The old identity will try to make a case for why this isn't the time. It will point to your flaws, your wounds, your unfinished healing. But none of that disqualifies you from becoming, because becoming isn't a final destination. It's a series of small, brave moments where you choose presence over programming. And in those moments, you reclaim your power not by defeating your ego, but by loving yourself beyond its fears. This is how you move forward, not as a perfect self, but as a whole one. There comes a point in your journey when something quietly, almost imperceptibly, shifts. You're not trying harder. You're not pushing louder prayers into the universe. You're simply being, and suddenly, the world around you begins to shift in response. It's subtle at first. You walk into a room, and someone starts a conversation that feels like the one you've been waiting for. An email arrives with an invitation you didn't ask for, but somehow feels meant for you. The things you once had to chase start arriving on their own. And you wonder what changed? You did. Not in the way you've been taught to measure change. You didn't master a new affirmation technique. You didn't visualize harder. You didn't hustle more. You aligned. Your internal frequency, the quiet hum beneath your words, beneath your actions, settled into coherence. And reality, which has always been listening not to your thoughts but to your vibration, began to echo it back. That's the real secret. Reality doesn't respond to force. It responds to resonance. It doesn't ask, did you earn it? It asks, are you matching it? And when you do, without effort, without trying to manipulate or control, the field responds. This is not magic. It's physics. It's vibrational law. When you are internally fragmented, trying to think one thing while feeling another, doing one thing while fearing the opposite, the signal you send is scattered. And the return, equally scattered. But when you live from a place of congruence, when your mind, heart, body, and field all say yes to the same truth, reality becomes unmistakably clear. Not always easy, but clear. Imagine a river that's finally unblocked. It doesn't rush, it flows. And this is what it feels like when you begin to live from your true frequency. You stop negotiating with life. You start dancing with it. You stop asking, how do I get there? And you start becoming the kind of person who already is. That's what it means to live as if. Not pretending, not faking, but embodying. Vibrating from the already, not the maybe one day. And here's the beauty. You don't have to micromanage the outcome. You don't have to hold the steering wheel with white knuckles. Because when you're vibrating from truth, the timeline becomes irrelevant. You know it's coming not because you forced it, but because you are it. People start to meet you in that field. Opportunities that once felt locked now open naturally. Not because you tricked reality into giving you something, but because you stopped resisting your own frequency. This is when life gets quiet and powerful. It stops being about goals and becomes about alignment. You no longer ask, am I doing enough? Instead, you ask, Am I being honest with what I feel, what I choose, what I radiate? Because the field doesn't need perfection. It needs presence. It needs truth. And truth, when sustained, is the most magnetic force you'll ever embody. So if you've been wondering why things suddenly start to flow, why the world feels less like a wall and more like a mirror, it's because something inside you finally stopped fighting. You didn't give up. You gave in to the you that was always waiting beneath the noise. This is the gift of vibrational alignment. You don't have to convince the universe anymore. You just have to stop sending mixed signals. You just have to live the truth you've always known. And the moment you do, reality listens. Not because it's finally decided to favor you, but because you finally started favoring yourself. That's when things arrive without effort. Not because you did the right ritual, but because you became undeniable. At first, it feels like everything is falling into place. You've aligned. You've tuned in. Your life starts reflecting back the peace, clarity, or joy you've been cultivating inside. But then, without warning, something wobbles. The job offer that felt perfect slips away. A conversation stings more than expected. Old patterns whisper from the edges of your mind. And just like that, doubt creeps in. Was it all a phase? Did I lose the frequency? Why can't I hold on to it? This is the hidden challenge of alignment, not arriving at a new vibration, but sustaining it. Because here's what no one tells you: you don't need to crash to fall out of tune. Sometimes, a subtle thought is all it takes. A single compromise in your truth. A quiet self-betrayal that doesn't even register until something around you begins to shift again. That's how sensitive vibrational coherence is. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. And consistency isn't built on effort. It's built on integrity. Integrity in vibration means your external life and internal world are not at war. You're not saying one thing but believing another. You're not visualizing wealth while fearing money. You're not longing for love while guarding your heart from ever feeling again. This is where many of us get stuck, not in desire but in contradiction. You want abundance, but judge those who have it. You want freedom, but fear what it would cost to claim it. You want to be seen, but stay hidden just in case it's not safe. And in these quiet inner frictions, your signal weakens, not because you're bad, but because you're broadcasting confusion. The field always responds, not to what you hope, but to what you believe underneath your words. So the real work isn't about trying harder. It's about becoming honest. Can you sit with your contradictions without shame? Can you name the parts of you that want two things at once? Can you bring light to the places where your actions don't yet match your essence? That's vibrational integrity. It's not a performance. It's a practice. And that practice isn't loud. It looks like small choices, saying no when you mean no, resting when your body whispers enough, letting go of a dynamic that no longer reflects your worth even if it's familiar. Each of these moments is a tuning fork. Each is a note that either sharpens or scatters your frequency. And yes, it's vulnerable, because living in integrity means risking the loss of who you were, what you tolerated, and sometimes even who you love. But what you gain is a life that no longer exhausts you with its misalignment. You stop managing your reality like a stage. You start meeting it like a mirror. This is why staying tuned is both simple and hard. Simple because truth is always available. Hard because truth requires courage. You'll be tempted to fall back into roles, to dim your light for acceptance, to soften your truth for comfort. But every time you do, your field fragments. And you'll feel it maybe not instantly, but soon enough. You'll sense the drift, the disconnect, The tiredness that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being too little of yourself. So pause, recalibrate. Not by fixing, but by remembering. Remember what it felt like when your field was whole, when you didn't need to explain yourself because you were simply clear. Return to that, not through willpower, but through softness. Breathe, feel, realign. Let go of the pressure to stay high vibe. Replace it with the intention to stay real. Because frequency is not a mood. It's not about staying positive. It's about staying true. And truth has texture. Sometimes it's joy. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's silence. But when you let it move through you without resistance, you remain tuned even in the storm. This is the kind of resonance that lasts, because it's not built on hype. It's built on wholeness. So don't chase the feeling. Anchor the field. And let everything in your life rearrange itself not to impress others, but to reflect the you that no longer wavers. There's a freedom that comes when the striving finally stops. When you stop chasing who you think you should be and simply become who you already are. It's the moment when the difference between doing to achieve and being who you want to embody becomes crystal clear, and it changes everything. Because when you've been focused on tasks, goals, and outcomes, your signal feels like effort. It vibrates with tension, with anticipation, with a desperate hope for results. But being hums from within. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to manufacture, because it already is. And the universe reflects that immediacy. Have you ever met someone, maybe online, maybe in person, who didn't try to convince you of their brightness, but you knew they were light? You didn't need to be persuaded. You just saw it. That kind of authenticity magnetizes life back to you, too. When you stop crafting every move and you simply rest in the vibration of who you are, doors begin to open with ease. You meet people at exactly the right moment, not because you planned it, but because your presence allowed them in. That job you thought you needed to force into existence shows up unasked. That conversation you were anxious about flowing suddenly just does, because the frequency of safety has already been set. This isn't luck. It's the energetic match that happens when you stop creating from lack and start living from fullness. Stepping from doing into being doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as soft as coming home. Remember what it felt like to be a child in your favorite room, the one place where you never had to pretend. That room still lives inside of you, ready to be inhabited again once the noise quiets. Let go, you think, just be. And with each breath, you encounter the essence of who you already are. Here, doing isn't wrong. It's just secondary. First, you inhabit the vibration of your true self. Then, whatever actions follow become reflections, not efforts. The deeper you live this way, the more coincidences line up. Not the forced kind, but the natural ones. An old friend, reaching out the moment you wondered where they'd been. A project unfolding without force. A shift in your heart that feels like home again. It's as if by choosing to be, you unhide from the landscape of life and life responds. So here's the question the world doesn't ask you. Who are you being right now before any outcome? And it isn't a trick question. It's an invitation to stand in the quiet knowing of your presence, to release the tightness in your chest, and let the rest of your world rearrange not by doing, but by being you. This is not the end of action. It's the beginning of inspired action that emerges from your vibration, not in spite of it. When you becomes more real than you do, life becomes kinder. Doors open. People mirror back trust. And the world, like a loyal friend, shows you the way back to yourself. It's not about achievement anymore. It's about alignment. And in that place, you're already home. It always comes back to this. Not a formula, not a method, but a vibration. You've traveled through recognition, resistance, surrender, and return. And if there's one thing that threads all of it together, it's not effort, it's not striving, it's coherence. Love, forgiveness, gratitude, not as poetic virtues, but as energetic blueprints, not as things to practice, but as states to remember. Because these three aren't goals, they're frequencies. Love isn't about needing or expecting. It's the spaciousness to let things be, to breathe alongside them, not bend them. Forgiveness isn't about saying it's okay. It's the vibrational decision to no longer carry what never belonged to you. Gratitude isn't a thank you note to the universe. It's the soft hum that says, I'm here, I see, I receive. These are not things you do. They are energies you become. And when you do, you don't have to chase life. It flows to meet you. So, if you're waiting for permission to begin, know this: you're not behind, you're not broken, you're not late, you're simply remembering. And remembering is the most sacred act of returning. No need to learn more, no need to fix yourself. Just tune in, that quiet frequency beneath the noise, it's always been yours. So now I ask you gently, not to answer out loud, but to feel, are you ready? To live as the frequency you truly are.